Sector.
And I'm Linda Zayas Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Hello everyone.
Everybody.
Welcome to Arcane Mark. Today we are going to be talking to you about house rules. Are you making the worst house rule mistakes? Well, here's how to avoid them. And please keep watching this video even if your group has no house rules whatsoever in Pathfinder, D&D, any other rules-heavy game that you're playing, because you'll still want to listen to our number one top house rules mistake that we're going to do first.
And that is never making any house rules ever.
That's right. The number one worst mistake you could possibly make with house rules is to just completely ban the possibility of using them no matter what happens in your game.
You're looking at the book and you're thinking, this attack does 50 times as much damage as this other attack. I wonder if there's a typo.
Yeah,
Nope.
or you see Starfinder First Contact for PF1 is like, this Circassian rifle does 1d810. No, we're going to have to do 1d810. So we're going to roll an 810-sided die or, a random number generator and see how much damage it is for this low-level enemy in a game where you will never have 810 hit
Or
points.
the game has a mechanic that every single time it comes up, your whole table groans and is like, do we really have to do this again? And you're like, well, the rule book says we have to, so I guess we're going to do it.
That's right. So the point is, you might be listening being like, well, okay, but we would change a D810. But that still doesn't mean that we ever use house rules. But the thing is, if you would change the D810, that means that you're willing to engage with house rules or making an adjustment based on your own judgment under at least extreme circumstances. It just might mean that you have a kind of a high tolerance before you'll use a house rule. And that's actually okay. Mm-hmm. It's okay to have very few house rules. It's even okay to technically have no house rules at a particular given time. But it's important to be open to house ruling in situations where what seems to be actually written in the book is just bad for your group, seems like maybe it's obviously wrong, or anything else like that. So it's really, really important. As someone who became a game designer and created Pathfinder 2nd Edition alongside the other three co-creators of Pathfinder 2nd Edition, like, before I even worked there, I was house ruling all the time in very rules-heavy games. Now, can there be bad house rules that make the game worse? Absolutely. In fact, that's what most of the rest of this video is going to be about, how to avoid those.
Yeah. And the first step to making sure that you're avoiding making those bad house rules is making sure you understand what the system is supposed to be doing in the first place.
That's right. So, number two biggest mistake for making house rules is that you haven't even fully comprehended the system yet, you haven't run it yet, and you're just making big changes to it before even your first game, just based on kind of vibes. Now, all of these rules have exceptions, right? Like the first rule where we said not being willing to make any house rules, we also said it's possible that your group will have no house rules, and that's okay. Similarly, if you really, really can tell, like that D810, right? Maybe because it was in the Starfinder First Edition, like, playtest monster book, you probably hadn't played Starfinder when you first saw that. Maybe you played Pathfinder, which had some similarities. Maybe you hadn't. Even then, it was obvious that the D810 was wrong. And there have been times Linda and I have house ruled something that was obviously wrong because there would be pages of flavor text about, like, how this thing is really, really hard and it's almost impossible. And then you look at the rule and it's like, there's like a 99% chance that this will happen every time.
Or you're looking at something and there's the game has within it written design guidelines for making a specific thing, and then you're like, wait a minute, this thing is just doesn't follow those guidelines at all. Like, this thing is just better in all ways than this other thing. You might notice some things like that, and then you can be like, all right, I feel confident to adjust it. But if you adjust one piece, the thing is that a lot of game systems, the pieces interact with each other in different ways. And so if you're making an adjustment up front, you may not recognize what the unintended consequences are.
That's true. So that's why it's usually best to at least try it out. If you have something that you're worried about, make sure that when you try it out, that thing comes up. Like, if you're like, well, I think that this rule for character advancement at 17th level that advances every character to gain this particular thing is busted. And then you're like, well, I've played the game from level 1 through 10. I actually played for 250 hours, which is a lot of hours. And you know what? I still think that thing at 17 is busted. You might have actually learned enough from 1 through 10 to figure out that the thing at 17 is busted. By the way, it's not impossible, but it would have been easier, and you probably didn't have to play for 250 hours if you actually maybe played at 16 and then at 17
and then
to see if that advancement at level 17 was busted. Now, there are many examples of this that are common in a lot of rules-heavy games. Like, for instance, one that I've seen sometimes online that people have mentioned that is just like a really bad example of just not playing and just making the rule is like someone will come onto like a Pathfinder 2 social media and be like, my GM kind of looked at the Pathfinder 2 rules and was like, ugh, 3 actions, that seems like too many. In D&D, you get your action and then you move. I'm just going to restrict everything to 2 actions. Everybody only has 2. And also things that take all your 3 actions for the turn, they only take 2. Also, because obviously you need to be able to do those. Like, you know, these GMs are not like a parodical, like, no, all of those are just gone from the game. Like, they do try to, like, adjust the game to make it like, make some kind of a sense with that. Sometimes they also, with these GMs, because it's happened, like, a lot of times. Yeah. The same thing. They'll be like, and also, we're changing the 2 action activities, like, Fireball to 1, so that you can, like D&D, you know, cast a Fireball and then move. Which causes its own cascade of issues where then now you can cast multiple things and then be like, well, and also you can't cast 2 spells in a turn.
But then you're intended to be able to cast 2 spells in a turn if they're the right spells.
And then they'll be like, okay, I cast Fireball and then I do a 2 action Meta Strike. Yeah. For 1 action.
And then it's like, well, you can't do 2 things that originally were...
I've never seen a GM say that. I've seen all the things that I've said before, because in D&D, you also can't cast 2 spells at a turn.
Fair enough. Or then they're going to be like, well, you know, but then it's a problem that drawing a weapon takes an action, so we're going to, you know... You wind up running into all kinds of unintended consequences where there's a reason why the 1, 2, and 3 action things have different costs and different weights in the system.
And if you never play it, you might think, oh, I could just fix all of this by patching more and more to it. And be like, yeah, your drawing of your weapon can be a 1 free interact for the turn, like in D&D. And eventually you have something that, like, is less busted than just limiting to 2 actions and making no other changes, but still causes, like, major cascading issues and in, like, the way that fights are balanced and the way that different classes and characters are balanced with each other. And so it's good when you're making, especially if the change is huge and not just a small thing like, okay, the Sarkassian rifle, the 810 looks like it was like an 8 or a 10 meant to be changed to the other and never deleted, so I'll change it to a D10 or a D8. Like, obviously, that's a big change for the Sarkassian rifle's power, but it's a very small change over the course of the game that this one monster with the Sarkassian rifle does that much damage.
It's a lot easier to make those targeted changes to start with. A bit like, I'm going to change how this one spell works or something like that, as opposed to, like, you definitely want more time before you're tinkering with the fundamental architecture. Or things like, you know, another thing that often gets house ruled are rules that surround, like, death and dying and healing in games. Whether it's because players say, you know, it's too easy to get back up in this game, and then they wind up making things a lot more lethal, or if they're like, well, you know, it's too hard to go down in this game, so...
Honestly, death and dying is probably one of the few things that you could at least try to house roll in a game system, even if you've never played it before, because it's an extreme edge case, and you might be able to just recognize from playing in other games that your group doesn't like the way that death and dying works in a particular system without even playing it. If you've played enough other games with those people, or you just discuss it. Like, if 3 people in your group never want their character to have a chance of permanent death, and you're, unless they decide they're going to die in that encounter, and you're playing a game that has chances of permanent death without them deciding, then it's pretty clear, even from ahead. So these are other examples of sort of exceptions. We're not saying you can never ever house roll without playing before. It's just that it is a common mistake to do so, especially on a sweeping change for fundamental mechanics. try to play test exactly what you're looking for. You might not have to. Like for the
Yeah.
death and dying example I gave, you don't need to play test. If 3 of your players want to always be able to throw a death flag to show that they're willing to die in that encounter, and otherwise
Yeah.
horrible consequences could happen, but not their character's
Then you
death.
might be like,
then
okay,
be
you know,
okay.
your character is knocked unconscious and can't be awoken for a long period of time.
Yeah, we'll
Or your
use
character has-
a Fabula Ultimate death roll, a Daggerheart death roll. Any of those other kinds of systems have a bunch of death rolls that let you flag when you're willing to let your character die.
Yeah, when you make changes to the system that are for the PCs or for the NPCs, you're also going to want to consider the flip side to that, which is, you know, should they apply to the other side too?
Yes. So the next biggest pitfall in house rules is house rules that feel unfair. I'm just going to say feel unfair because of the fact that actually they might be fair. And there might be house rules that are actually unfair in the PC's benefit that feel fair to your players. So it's easy to make this mistake because of the fact that sometimes designing the house rule really balancedly well actually can make it feel unfair because the game was balanced asymmetrically to begin with. However, a lot of the times that things feel unfair, they do so not even because of any balanced reasons, but just because of the vibe of them. So here's an example. Big example. If you decide that you're going to create a new house rule on spell casting, where if you get hit on the round that you're casting a spell, but before you cast it, that you have a chance of failing. But it only applies to the PCs, not spellcaster enemies.
Yeah.
Now, it's possible that based on your group's meta for D&D or Pathfinder or any of these rules-heavy games, that's actually justified because maybe you're playing a game where spellcaster enemy is kind of already the weakest enemy and easy to defeat or disrupt by the PCs, whereas PC spellcasters have gone out of control. I don't know. But that's something that's going to feel unfair to the players. Why did they get to disrupt my spells?
From a world logic perspective, why are my... Also, it's like, from a world logic perspective, it doesn't make sense. Why can my spells be disrupted, but no one else's can?
Exactly. And when logic comes in like that, it influences the feeling of fairness. Even if you, as the GM, have done all the calculations, you're like, this would be fair, because the PCs have all these levers to pull. Let's say you're playing D&D 5e where it's really biased towards the players. It'd be like they have so many ways to avoid even taking the damage, and the monsters are really behind. It's like it doesn't matter. It still is going to feel unfair, and so therefore it's going to make players chafe at them. The problem is, as the GM, the players are going to have setbacks. They're going to have big successes. When they have the setbacks, if it seems like you did something that they think is unfair, they're going to blame that for the setback. An example I have of this is that my little brother was running a pre-written adventure path that had some brutal encounters in it, okay? And he sometimes... there were other encounters that were just really weak or uninteresting. And so he adjusted some of them. And so then... so when his group had a real serious problem with one of the encounters, they were like, did you adjust this one? And he was like, no, actually, this was just from the book. They're like, oh, okay. Yeah, sure. Even though it was actually the worst one. And then later they had less of a problem with an encounter. Like, did you adjust this one? He was like, yeah, but you know, the thing that you were having trouble with was already originally in there. I just kind of added this third-party psionics class to it. And they were like, no, you did that. This is not totally unfair. And this was just literally, you know, they were like... experienced role players that they were playing the game together, and it because they had something that felt unfair to latch onto, they felt that they decided it was unfair, even though the encounter that was more unfair was the one that was right out of the book. Books have this feeling of impartiality, even though honestly people like me have written them and we did our best, but we're not going to get everything right. Whereas
and even if it's right, even if what you wrote is right for, say, like, our home group or some of the other people you play with, it's not going to be right for everyone's home group. Right.
And the person in front of you has this feeling of fallibility, the GM who's there, and is easier to blame, especially if something seems that is off-kilter or potentially unfair. So make sure that you have at least a feeling or a veneer of fairness. One way to do this, by the way, is to get your group involved with the house rules. If everyone agrees to it, and especially if it applies evenly over everything, even if you know that most of the people who are using the thing that's going to be affected are the PCs, then it's much more likely that people will think it was fair because they opted into it. Whereas as opposed to if you just said that and you just kind of declared it, you're like, well, this is what it is. It's easier for it to feel unfair. So, like, this is a continuum. It's a spectrum of things that can feel more or less fair, and it also depends on your players.
And it also depends upon how much the game system creates a distinction between the way that NPCs work and PCs work. You know, if NPCs and PCs are pulling from the same list of spells, for example, then you're going to want to make sure that those work the same way, and then also that people approach them in the same way. You know, if you've added a new capacity to a spell, like I saw in chat people talking about, you know, house ruling Dimension Door to let you carry multiple creatures. You know, if the PCs can do that, then the NPCs should be able to do that too. And that's going to transform the way that encounters can feel.
Absolutely. So speaking of ways to make things feel less fair, our third house rule mistake is also a common way to make your house rule feel less fair by doing this. So it kind of ties in. So big house rule mistake is you got really annoyed by something and then you decided to house rule it, either on the spot or, you know, after some reflection before the next session. You're like, okay, this thing is uber nerfed that you were constantly doing. It's pissing me off. I'm uber nerfing it. So now, as with all of these, there are exceptions to this. There can be times that there's something that is annoying you and it's annoying everybody, like, except, you know, maybe just the one person who's using it.
That player has found a build with their plasma death gun that means that they win every encounter and the other characters are irrelevant and the other players and you are all getting annoyed with this plasma death gun. Or they found a particular combo that's like, whoa, that's awesome, but I don't want to see that every session.
So the way to avoid this is the same as the way to avoid the feeling of unfairness. Get other people in the group on board. If you are having a situation where you're frustrated, instead of just knee-jerk taking out your frustration with a house rule, if you can get the rest of the group on board with the house rule together, even if it's everyone except the person who has that as their main build because they like it, that still feels more like, okay, we've all decided together we're going to make this limitation. If the person who's using it also will make the limitation, that's great. And they might, I don't know, like, I'm someone who always wants to rein in, like, some of those out-of-the-wall, completely out-of-bounds features. But if they're not, I'll use them.
Yeah.
Like, I'll sometimes be like, I just saw this thing in a new book, and I think it's busted. And that we should change it in this way. As a player, I might even do this and be like, and the GM's like, nah, that seems fine. I'm like, okay, I'm going to use it then because the fact that I thought it was busted was partially, you know, it seemed really good and like something I would want to use, but maybe too good. And if you think it's not too good, I'm going to use it.
Yeah.
And then if later they're like, you were right, it was too good, I'll be like, okay, let's weaken it, but I might want to rebuild out of the things that I built to
and
take into this.
That's another thing that's an important part for house ruling and changing things. You know, because sometimes you'll have house rules that are like, okay, up front I know these are the house rules. We've done this game before. My campaign, we use these rules. But if you're adding new ones and there's something that's going to change the way that a character plays or the way that a character feels, then you're going to want to work with your players to make sure they can rebuild things if they're no longer satisfied with the new mechanic.
That's right. And so another thing that is important with that is for house rules, the house rule mistake is inconsistency. And this is different than making a consistent house rule that's asymmetrical that people think is unfair. This is like inconsistently applying the house rule where you just sometimes, but not other times, you put the house rule in. Maybe you didn't even tell people what the house rule was until after they'd already made a decision that was based on not knowing that the house rule existed.
Yeah, so let's say that, you know, like, Janet is a hyper-optimizer whose character is always, like, kicking butt and doing incredible things, but Enrique is a new player, and you decide, well, you don't want Janet to be taking too much of the spotlight, so you're going to generally rule against things whenever they happen based on things that Janet's character does, but rule in favor of them when they're based on things that Enrique's character does.
So, yeah, and I think that one may even fall into the unfair-seeming one situation where it's like, it's a consistently applied rule that Janet doesn't get to do this, but Enrique does. Whereas for inconsistency, it would more just be like, about 20% of the time you apply this rule, and the other 80% you don't, or vice versa, or it's even 50-50. Just sometimes, and then someone will bring it up and like, what about your house rule about the chance to hit their own ally? Like, nope, it's not happening. This already happened. But when does that occur? It's like, I decide. So like having a house rule that they know and can rely on, to turn this from a negative into a positive. To make a good house rule, you want it to be upfront about it. Let people know in advance before they've made the decision and be like, okay, you try to shoot the demon, but you actually strike and kill your injured person that you were trying to protect.
Like,
and you're like, what? It's like, that's always been a house rule. I've just been rolling secretly every time.
Yeah, no,
like,
you're going to want to be like, okay, this is a situation where things are really crowded and you might possibly, when you're firing into this combat, there's like a lot of cover, so your shots might be harder. You might accidentally hit someone who's in the way because you see like the demon is picking up this person and trying to use them as a human shield. Communicating to the players so that they know what's going on and can make informed decisions.
Let them know in advance and hopefully way in advance.
And let's say that sometimes you may not realize that you didn't communicate things clearly and the player's like, oh, I want to shoot into that area, and then you need to like give some more detail to make sure that they understand.
Or just directly tell them, if you shoot into that area, it might hit this person who's being used as a human shield. Are you okay with that? Like, tell them in advance, as much in advance as you can, which might just be when they declare the action, you put a pause to the action, remind them of the house rule or the ruling that you're making for the situation, and then if they still say yes, you move forward. Yeah. Then they had all the information. But also, it should be something that they can predict, because as an archer, if they can never predict when you're gonna put this rule into place, because you just kind of randomly do it some of the time, and it's not based on their positioning on the map or how many people are there. It's just based on your vibes.
Or like the personality and behavior of particular NPCs where it's consistent.
But if it's just based on your vibes when it's going to happen, it's going to be frustrating for them to play an archer because it's kind of a mother may I not hit my allies instead of the enemy situation. And so the point here of these house rules is to make them predictable by their consistency so that players can design their characters, actions and personalities and builds and mechanics based on what they know the house rule to be. And so that's why telling them in advance and applying it consistently is important. And so the last major house rule mistake that we had for you today is one that's tied into all of the other ones except not making house rules, which is making house rules kind of emotionally just right in the moment. In the heat of the moment, you emotionally make a house rule. Now, obviously, we're talking about rules-heavy games that have a rule for this. We're not talking about games that are story games where you're the GM and you need to make
rulings on
you make rulings in the heat of the moment based on emotion, and that's the only thing that you do in that game because that's the point of your role in those other games. But in a game where there actually was a rule for it, and
you're saying I'm changing with that
out of emotion, you're just, and you know that you're changing the rule too. You know what the rule is, but you're just like, I'm really mad about all this, so therefore, no. Your character dies at dying 3 when you thought you were going to die at dying 4. Or just like, yeah, you know what, we're not even going to roll for this, the monster just eats you. It was bigger than you by enough size that you're just dead.
Yeah.
Or anything like that could, in a story-based game, like maybe in Powered by the Apocalypse, the monster makes a move and you're like, yeah, you just get eaten. Yeah. That's the move that was appropriate for this situation. But in, it depends on which Powered by the Apocalypse, of course. Yeah. But, in these rules-heavy games, that's just sort of not a good thing to do. No matter how upset you are, no matter how excited you are, maybe you're excited, that's why you're making this house rule. Doing something just as purely based on emotion on the spot is not a good time to make a house rule for your game. Now, what you can do, if you're tempted to make a house rule or you feel like this is a moment where the regular rules are kind of weird, but everything is keyed up, call for a short break. Yeah. Let people go to the bathroom. Try to calm down a little and think, because the answer might be that you still should make the house rule. In fact, maybe the house rule you made emotionally in the heat of the moment is actually really awesome. But it's a way to put yourself on tilt and potentially make a decision that will cause any of the other errors that we mentioned throughout this video And so therefore, it's not a good time to make a house rule, and it's better to just calm down a little bit, reflect, see if it's still the right move.
Yeah. And if you're not sure, then, and you think about what it is that you want to achieve and try to talk to your players about it. It's like, this XYZ seems like it's really not working or that it's unfair or whatever. Like, how can we address this and see what they have to say? I guess one other mistake is to, just as house ruling is about, taking a look at the rule book and what's printed in there as it stands and saying, I can change this to make it better for my group. Be willing to change your own house rules too.
Yes. So, constantly changing your house rules, just like, if you have 10 pages of house rules and in between each session, 5 of those pages change every time, that can be a problem for your players because you may be spending 20 hours a week thinking about your house rules and how you're going to adjust them and how you're going to make them better. And maybe you are making them much better each time. But the problem is your players don't have the mental bandwidth to memorize every iteration of your house rules, even if you do. But on the other side, as Linda said, being inflexible and being like, I have made this house rule, it's never going to change no matter how much it's proven to harm the game because I can't go back on it. It would make me look like a fool. The only thing that's really making you look like a fool is doubling down on your house rule when it's causing a problem for you.
Now, if you are now that doesn't mean that you couldn't have a situation where house rules change frequently, but you want to make sure you have player buy-in. Like, for example, you're like, okay, I'm trying to do something new with this system. This system is normally a fantasy setting, but I want to make a bunch of house rules to kind of graft onto it to let it do some more sci-fi stuff. So let's work together to design some expansions and change things around. And then you're soliciting feedback and working in sort of like a playtest frame of mind. But if you're not in that frame of mind, you want to have some consistency. Oh, I see. I see a comment from Rohit here. Not understanding dice math is a common mistake. Absolutely.
Oh, for sure.
Throwing in bonuses that are really high or, allowing a bunch of extra rerolls and things like that can completely tilt the way that a game works.
Or not knowing what the actual damage expectations are and changing a dice expression for damage, anything like that. So these are our top tips for the GM. I want to give a short bonus round for a player here at the end because as a GM, you are now armed with a lot of knowledge about house rules. You're going to be a player in another game. Or maybe you watch this and you just are a player because you wanted to see what GMs go through with this. What is your best practice when dealing with house rules from another GM who might be making some of these mistakes? Well, especially if the mistake they're making is making emotionally charged house rules or house ruling things to nerf or buff them out of frustration. It's not gonna go well if you're just like, you made the worst house rule mistakes of all time. You should watch this video about worst house rule mistakes because you're the worst house ruler.
Yeah.
It's just gonna kind of potentially put your GM on the defensive. So instead, you can just talk with your GM. Say about how you think it's really cool that they're willing to house rule things to try to fix them. Maybe if you do want to share this video, say that you saw a video recently that mentioned that the number one house rule mistake is from GMs who aren't willing to house rule, and so you're really grateful that they are willing to house rule and to adjust things. And you might suggest this video, even if you don't, because maybe they don't like watching YouTube videos, or they'd rather just discuss it with you. You know your GM, at least somewhat. Then what you can say at that point is that you're also really interested in house rules, and that you'd like to help make house rules or talk about house rules, and even bring up something to start it off that is something that you've noticed, if there is anything, hopefully there is, that is obviously not to your character's advantage. In case you have a GM who's suspicious or has, like we said, maybe has high emotions are running, it might be because of another player, because if you're this kind of player who's trying to help, it's probably not because of you. It might just be a them thing. Maybe they're having stress in their life. Regardless, make it clear by giving some examples of things that you were thinking about that is something that wouldn't help you, or even might be something that was disadvantageous to your character in the situation, to show that you're interested in house rules. And once they're willing to engage with you, they might be willing to use you as a bouncing off point for house rules that they're thinking about. And later, you could maybe bring in some that they came up with that you are having problems with. Once you've established a rapport about talking about house rules, do not start with the one that is
Yeah.
really
And
getting
also,
your...
like, if you recognize
your
that
crop.
your GM thinks that darkness is overpowered and is constantly nerfing things that are darkness related, rebuild your character away from the flashpoints.
Yes. That's an easy way to do it.
Like,
Just be like, yeah, you know what? I'm not sure, but I trust you on this about darkness. Can I rebuild to not be playing a fetchling darkness cast dark elemental avatar of darkness? And hopefully they're gonna say yes because they're
sick of dealing with darkness.
If they say no, you have to play it, and I'll keep nerfing it. Then
just leave.
Yeah, you're gonna have some situations there.
Like, if they're not gonna engage with you in good faith, then just leave.
Yes. So that is a list of some of the worst overall house rule mistakes. Obviously, there's specific house rules that are bad, that are commonly made, but they often fall into one or more of those subcategory of house rules.
Are there house rules that you particularly love that you have in your games, or ones that you see other folks putting in that you just tear your hair out whenever you see them? Let us know in the comments below.
Please do. We'd love to talk with you about house rules also on our Discord, tiny.cc/arcademark. Please like and subscribe if this content is your jam, or even join us if you'd like to support us. We will now have a vote for our next episode. And by next, I mean next Saturdays, not
Looks like
Tuesdays.
we have 2 votes for...
We have multi-classing
Yes.
and hybrid characters on Tuesday.
For theme spellcasters, flavor versus mechanics.
That's
and
right.
one person who can re-vote because we are not quite ready to do what they have suggested.
That's right. They've suggested a Daggerheart review, which we are going to do at some point, or put on the list at some point, but Daggerheart actually has fairly robust, 2-player version, so we may actually play that and then get back to you when we have real playtest experience. We try to do videos only on games that we have played.
Yes.
In
the same way that we talk about, you want to have the experience with it before house ruling, you also want to have experience with it before talking about
That's
it.
right.
Because there's a lot you can learn from playing a game that you don't necessarily get just from reading.
So number 1, build a hazard workshop. We'll build a hazard on the stream. Number 2 is an AMA for Save My Game questions and answers. Number 3 is a Design Diaries theme spellcasters flavor versus mechanics. This was requested on the Arcade Mark Discord for people who are into the idea of having a spellcaster who's very highly themed.
It's like, I want to play the Firecaster of Fire.
Yes, but then they're thinking about how in various game systems, sometimes the feel and the sort of the fiction of it kind of chase against the mechanics of the system that are encouraging you to diversify what you have. And so it's going to be talking about the design of systems, talking about how that can happen, ways to avoid it or get around it involving system design or house rules. Number 4, we'll play a game on the stream. Number 5 is we'll do an Eldamon element sort of guide. And number 6 is other.
Oh yeah, Rex Felix uses exploding ones, the catastrophe upon catastrophe.
There you go. Explode the ones constantly.
Those are funny.
Oh, wait, no. Actually, it's not a catastrophe. They're not exploding a 1 on a d20. They're exploding damage roll ones by getting to reroll.
Oh, okay. So it's not like the
It
1
actually
to 1 to 1 or
makes
20,
it so
20.
1 is the strongest thing that you can roll.
Oh,
because-
yeah.
But but unlike exploding the maximum number, which just makes your big damages more, this makes it so you can't possibly get a 1. But you could, even if you keep rolling a bunch of 1s, on a d8, you'd have to roll it 8 times before it was as good as rolling an 8 and then...
Yeah.
Better than rolling an 8 and then a 7 on exploding
That's cool.
upward.
I don't think I've seen that one before. That's why I wasn't sure.
All right. So, yeah, a lot of people voted for 3. So, we're going to do a design diary on next Saturday. All right, everyone.
Thank you all for joining us.
Let us give you our experience points, which we have done. All right, take care. We'll see you on Tuesday to talk about multi-classing and hybrid characters, and on Saturday to talk about